here, the purpose for this filming
Can you edit this out?
is
on my part?
to try to leave something that tells the story of how NASU got started. And so we attended the alumni dinner last night. We heard the president of the university speak and a few other of the officials of the administration, and it inspired me to think about ways to talk about what happened here 30 some odd years ago. I guess I would begin by saying that the context is important. The historical context is important because this was happening all over the United States. It wasn't just here. University of Oregon was just one place where minorities were suddenly trying to gain access to a university experience. There had been two earlier revolutions in American higher education. The most recent before that was the one caused by the GI Bill after World War II. It increased the number of students in American universities by about 2.5 million overnight, and the number of high school attendees by about 8 million. So you had a huge utilization of that resource for educational purposes. People who now had access to a university who never would have had access. Well, then we had the death of President Kennedy, and we had the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, and the Vietnam conflict. Public discontent was on the rise about the war. Minorities were beginning to feel their strength. Certainly the Civil Rights Act itself became important. Martin Luther King was, everybody knew who Martin Luther King was, his assassination, the assassination of both of the Kennedy brothers. Suddenly we were in a nation of turmoil and unrest. And the University of Oregon felt that no less than the University of Michigan, Kent State, certainly they felt it. Four students killed in a standoff between National Guard up there and students. Berkeley was probably the initial part of it. For Indian people, it really did begin at Berkeley with a guy named Lehman Brightman. And Lehman Brightman was a young Indian guy running around the country giving speeches, inflammatory speeches about the Indian Health Service and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and it was exciting Indians all over the United States. And minority people weren't stupid. Indian people weren't stupid. They knew that that a university education really meant something. It meant something in very real economic terms for their tribes, for their families, and so on. So there was this wave of minorities coming at universities from all over the United States. And we felt it here. George's older brother, Wilford, was a student here, and he really started the Native American Student Union. By the late 1960s, it had matured into a pretty active club. George, in the meantime, had gotten a job here with Student Services and became a gateway for many Native people in Oregon and outside of Oregon to get into this institution. And he had managed to make communication with a number of faculty who were also sympathetic to the idea of getting minorities and particularly Native Americans into a college and university setting. Notable among them would be, probably the top of that list would be Barry Tolkien, I guess.
One on top.
Yeah. Ed Coleman worked also in the English department. Ed Ebbinghausen in the astronomer. Peter von Hippel in physics, who was a physicist, brought a young Navajo man, Ticina Scott, in as a student, and so he was interested in getting Indians into science. So we had a number of allies in the faculty itself that were beginning to see the possibilities for getting Indians going here. But what it was to start with was a kind of a voluntary club. It didn't have any resources beyond what they could give themselves. There was no outside money. There was the student union. There was Urban Memorial Union, and those Herb gave office space to those clubs downstairs in that building. The first one to be active was the Project 75, which was the sort of a university club for black students. And of course, this was when the Black Panthers were marching on the streets of Eugene on Saturday mornings, scaring the hell out of people. And so, you know, I guess what I would say about that time was that it was not necessarily it was not a sanguine, it was not a peaceful time. It was a conflict. It was almost a hostile conflict between the aspirations of the people coming, the minorities that were coming, and the university, which on the one hand was trying to open itself up, but on the other hand was scared to death about what it meant. And so you had in the university itself an ambivalence about, you know, did they really want, and how far were they willing to go to open the doors up for these new people. And so we were going to test that out over the next 5 or 6 years. That was going to be tested out, and I'm afraid that the verdict of that test might not be what we think it was. It was not, in my view, it was not altogether a successful test. But in any case, I don't know, George, you got anything to add at this point? Or you want me to just keep?
Too much to add.
Okay, all right.
I think you stated the programs were started in the 60s. It wasn't until we didn't organize a Native American program. The first club was started in probably 69.
It was, yes.
And my brother Will and I got to talking about it, and I spoke to him, and he told me he'd already been thinking about it, and so then we talked around, and Dick Wilson was here on campus he was in volcanology, or?
He was a mathematician and volcanologist.
Yeah. And
Menominee Sioux.
And he was very interested in well, we were calling it not exactly a club, but it was like an Indian club. And we had James Florendo was here, and so we were talking about, well, what are we going to call it? And we came up with I don't know if it was Salish, Wasco.
It's a combination of Papago, which is they call themselves O'odham people.
O'odham, yeah.
Spiliai O'odham, Coyote, people of the Coyote.
Yeah, Spiliai
O'odham.
Yeah, it was a combination.
Yeah.
And so that's what we called ourselves. And we had meetings and tried fundraising. We tried to get money to bring what was that? That Indian woman singer.
Buffy St. Marie.
Buffy St. Marie. She claimed to be Indian, and we were asking for her help. Would she? I'm sorry, Buffy, but you don't have a good reputation with us, maybe with other Indians, but nope, they wouldn't even talk to us. No, she does not do fundraisers. She's in there to make money. Well, go make your money. I'm not sure she was really Indian anyway, but you never know. Who knows? There was a real struggle to have recognition, and we wanted to have a place to meet. We needed a longhouse, and I'm not sure now how it came about, but the university granted us a space in one of the old Army barracks.
World War II.
World War II, which had been put up for housing, temporary housing for the GIs when they came back. Denny just talked about that era. Well, these were left over, and, oh, right here.
Right here on this
There was
spot.
one right here where we're sitting. There's one, and they turned it over to us, and
We had it painted inside and outside.
right, inside and out, and
That was the first longhouse.
the first longhouse.
It was blessed by the elders from all the tribes in Oregon.
Yep, and we needed a Native American program, not just the student union. We needed a program which would help support Indian kids coming in here who needed academic support and maybe financial and personal support. And one day, I was downtown. I lived on 260 West Broadway back then. Nice big old house. And I was walking right near there, and I saw a VW bus, a Volkswagen bus came by, and it was loaded with people. And I looked in there, and here was Denny DeGross, Denny and Ellen DeGross, and their children in the bus. And I, said, "Oh, hello. Oh, hey, what are you doing?" "Oh, we're traveling. We're going somewhere."
We had gone to high school together.
Yes, that's right, down at Gold Beach we had. And they were going somewhere. Sound like Old Man Coyote. Yeah. "What are you doing?" "Oh, I'm going somewhere." Oh, that's as ambiguous as anything. And he was actually going, I think he was looking for a job. They were moving from Agnes on Rogue River. And I said, "Well, why don't you stop here?" "Yeah, what? You want to go to school? You want to go to graduate school? We've got a program in counseling with a stipend for graduates." I think maybe Ellen said yes first, I don't know. They said, "Yeah, sure." They stopped here. I'm not sure where they went immediately. They might have slept in the bus. I'm not sure. But I introduced him to people in education. I was in a graduate program at that time, working on a master's in counseling. And Denny joined us, and he got into the program and started moving ahead. And then we needed to select a director for the Native American program.
Let me go back. Can I go back?
Yeah,
first?
well, okay, I'll let you this time, but
All right.
don't do that too much.
I want to name the students who were in the first cohort.
Well, we hadn't gotten there yet.
Yeah, well, yeah, actually we did.
In the club.
In the club.
Spigai Autumn.
Yeah, Spila Autumn.
Okay, go ahead.
Ellen of DeGross, of course, is one. Debbie Jackson was another. Marcia Smith from Warm Springs. Althea Smith from Warm Springs. James Ferrendo. Bob Bajorkas.
Yep.
Bob Cole from Klamath.
Yep.
Larry Calico from Warm Springs. Moses Barnaby from Big Island, Hawaii. Ann Morris from Philadelphia, Mississippi, Choctaw. Gerald Smith, Warm Springs. John Wasson, Shoshone-Bannock. Skip Renfro, Shoshone-Bannock. Ed Enmo, 8 different tribes. Nobody knows exactly what tribes. Jim Wyatt, Warm Springs. Phil Parker, Shawnee.
Yeah.
And that was it. That was the first cohort.
Are you sure? Seth, someone from down at Chiloquin. What was his name?
Yeah, I'd forgotten about Seth.
Yeah. He had one of those common, unusual accidents in which his beautiful Camaro or whatever it was
Yeah.
flew right off the highway,
Yeah.
off a turn and smashed.
Yeah.
A common accident for some upset Native people.
But I guess the point of mentioning those names is that for many of them, this felt like Mars. This campus felt like Mars. It felt like a place that was not home. It was not a comfortable place. Barry Tolkien, who was in the Department of English at the time, had gathered a bunch of Indian kids together and to try to figure out why Indian kids were having such a hard time in passing basic English 101. And so he spent weeks just talking with people to talk about what would a class that supported Indian kids look like, what would it feel like. One of the first things they did was they found a room that had a large round table. They got rid of all the desks that, where we're looking at the back of somebody's head. And then they talked about what kind of things would be appropriate for writing projects. What kind of things could you write about and what kind of things could you not typically write about for cultural reasons? What were things that were sort of taboo among your group that would be expected in a sort of typical English 101 course? And so they talked about those kind of things. And so Tolkien ran the really first successful class for Native Americans in English. And everyone who took that class basically passed because they made a real effort to design the class in geometric terms that were comfortable to Indian people. It was much more circular, it was much more fluid, it was less linear and less segmented. He did that for 2 years. And then he turned the class over to me. And at that time, I was a volunteer counselor with the Native American Student Union with a guy named Denny Baker, who was a Shoalwater Quinault from Washington State. And so we became Denny Incorporated. Denny was we were the two counselors for the club, for the Spili Iotum. And then I went to Alaska in '72 and was up there for a year. And in the meantime, a group of people had gone to the state legislature. Among them, Ellen Hasty, who was a Shawnee woman, Pearlie Smith from Project 75, Felipe Canedo from the Sesamex program, or Sesamex Student Union, and Alfonso Cabrera, and a guy named Bobby Anderson. They'd all gone to the legislature and to get money to actually put into a university support program for minority programs. They scored a huge hit with the legislature. They got about $350,000 that first year. The university's share of that was, for those times, quite a large amount of money. It was nearly $200,000. And with that, they created a program called the Equal Opportunity Program, EOP. And they hired 2 Hispanic young men from Los Angeles who had no experience in Oregon to run the program. I've forgotten the leader's name. I can't remember his name, but the assistant was a guy named Christopher Munoz. And these guys basically set up an office and no one ever saw them after that. So they, we didn't know what they did. We didn't know what their business was. The university's response to the money was to put the money into their infrastructure. So they put the money into student services. They hired assistants for Dean Rhodes in student administration, in university administration. They hired assistants for the vice president's offices and the 3 vice presidents, Hawk, Bogan, and the other guy, I've forgotten his name. Whereas the minorities' expectation was that if the legislature's given you money to support minority programs, then we ought to have some voice in how that's structured, and particularly Indians. The Indian people who are here in the state were saying, if you're going to start a thing called an Indian program here, then by God, you've got to talk with us. You can't just hire put together a structure, hire the people to do this thing, and then say, here you are. And that's essentially what happened. In the process of that, they divided the student unions from the program. So it became two parts. It became the voluntary student union part, which was still housed in downstairs Herb Memorial, and it became the program part, which was housed in Fenton Hall. So the first office was in Fenton Hall in 1973. And then we worked on the Longhouse. We worked the first year's job was to get the Longhouse, and we finally persuaded them to give us this space right here in the old
Barracks building.
BOQ, the old bachelor officers' quarters, was right here on this space. And there were 3 buildings. They had been used by the rehab section of the School of Education for quite a few years. Marty Acker and those guys. And then they gave up that end building that had been Marty's, and that became the Longhouse. So then we moved from Fenton Hall down here. But we still had the problem of, what do we do with the student union? How can we have a Native American program and a Native American student union? Of the groups that were created out of the EOP program, and there were 4 of them. Actually there were 5 of them. There was the Native American element, there was the black element, there was the Chicano element, there was the poor white element, that was Bob Coiner, and then there was the women's element. So there were 5 parts of the EOP program. And I felt that the design of the program, from Vice President Bogan's perspective and from Dr. Rhodes' perspective, was to separate the students from their program. The design was to get the students over here and the program over here. The Native Americans, the Indians, said, no, we're going to have it together. So that's why we focused on the Longhouse, was to make sure that we didn't separate the program from the student union. So when the program moved down to the Longhouse, they closed up the shop in the downstairs part of Herb and moved it over here too. So that's how of all those groups, only the Indians kept their student union and their program together. And that was a huge strength. We still felt like we were in a war. It felt like a war zone here. I mean, people would come here and go to work, or they'd come here as students. I don't know if people realize, but let me just go through some more of these names. Cal Poncho, Alabama Coshawty. Adrian Moody, Nez Perce. Ann Moody, Nez Perce. John Connor, Umatilla. Seon Person, Ogallala. Agnes Gozen Center, Ogallala. Buzz Nightpipe, Sioux. Twila Souers, Sioux. Tigre Tividad, White Earth Apache. Mark Jackson, Warm Springs. Zelma Minthorn, Umatilla. D. Olin, Athabascan, Nenana River, Alaska. Fred Aloya, half Japanese, half Eskimo, Dillingham. Alfred Soboleff, Tlingit Haida from Juneau. Ivan Dixon, a Choctaw-speaking young man who looked black. He came to us, you're in the wrong place. He started talking to us in Choctaw. He walked down by the pool tables next to P75 in the Herb Memorial Union, and the kids that were playing pool there tried to get him to come over and play pool with them. And he got over there. He had his guitar. I remember Dino carried that guitar around all the time. And right away, they smelled that there was something wrong with this guy. He did not act like them. He was he was a Choctaw, and he was just this great kid. Tichina Scott from Ponca City, Arizona, Navajo. And then Ricky Jackson from Philadelphia, Mississippi, Choctaw. Denny Baker, Shoalwater. Norm Wasson, who came and followed his brother John Wasson. Les Howe, Grand Round.